If you found this recording by accident, stop for a second and ask yourself why it was saved at all. Because I didn't make this to be heard. I made it because I couldn't keep it in my head anymore. I needed somewhere to put it where it wouldn't crawl around behind my eyes while I tried to sleep. My name doesn't matter. It won't help you. You can call me Agent R. That's what most people called me anyway. Because out here you don't get names. You get radios. You get shifts. You get sectors. You get miles of nothing that you learn to read like a language. And if you work the organ pipe sector, you already know what I mean when I say nothing. This part of Arizona isn't empty. It's full of heat that doesn't leave even after the sun goes down. It's full of dust so fine it gets into sealed doors. It's full of cactus spines that end up in your boots even when you swear you didn't step near one. It's full of radio static, footprints, scraps of cloth, water jugs, prayer cards, and the kind of silence that makes you talk to yourself just to prove you're still there. And then one night I saw something move. Not a person, not an animal, something else, slow, low, like it was trying to remember what shape to be. I'm telling you now because I don't think I'm the one reporting into dispatch anymore. I don't think the voice they hear at night is mine. Sometimes I'm not even sure the thoughts in my head are mine. Not real. Real. Not real. Before I say the rest, let me ask you something. If you're still listening right now, you're already the kind of person who doesn't look away when the desert looks back. So do me a favor. If you want more stories like this, the kind that don't let you sleep right, make sure you're subscribed. Because once I get far enough into this, you're going to want to hear what happens next. And I don't want you losing the trail halfway through. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. What city? What country? What time of night it is for you? I want to know how far this voice carries. How far the organ pipe sector reaches when it decides it's not done with someone. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about the desert. It doesn't end at the border. It doesn't end at the line on the map. It doesn't end at your front door. It follows routines. It follows patterns. It follows people who learn it too well. I've been border patrol long enough to know what fear looks like in a human body. I've seen heat stroke. I've seen people who walked too far and drank too little. I've seen smugglers dump water to slow a group down. I've found camps where the food is still warm and nobody is there. But that's normal fear. That's fear you can name. This was different. This started with a report that never made sense in writing. 3rd week of my rotation in organ pipe. Graveyard shift. New moon. No light except starlight in the thin white glare of the dashboard. There are places out there where the world feels unfinished. You can drive for an hour and the scenery doesn't change. Same low brush. Same pale sand. Same black shapes of organ pipe cactus holding their arms up like they're waiting for something. Sometimes you get that smell of creosote, sharp and clean, like rain that never arrives. Sometimes you get nothing at all, not even the smell. Just dry air. Dispatch had been quiet most of the night. A few check-ins. A couple of pings about sensors that turned out to be javelina. My partner that night was a quiet guy. The kind of agent who keeps his hands on the wheel and his eyes ahead. Not because he's afraid, but because he's learned the desert doesn't reward curiosity. We were working a stretch, where the wash lines cut like veins through the sand. Smugglers like those cuts because they hide movement. Migrants like them because they hide bodies. And agents like them because everything leaves sign in a wash if you know how to look. We pulled off the main track and rolled slow. No headlights, just parking lights. You do that when you don't want to advertise yourself, when you want to listen. Listening is most of the job out there. You listen for voices, for footfalls, for brush snapping, for that faint plastic crackle of a water bottle being handled, for the shuffle of a group trying not to make noise and failing anyway. That night, we heard none of it. The silence wasn't normal. It wasn't peaceful. It was organized, like a room going quiet, because someone important just walked in. I remember checking my mirror and feeling a strange thought pass through me. The kind you don't admit out loud, that if I looked back long enough I might see something sitting in the bed of the truck, perfectly still, patient, not real, real, not real. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the new guy spooked by the dark. I didn't want to be the guy who blames the desert for his nerves. We parked near a wash and stepped out. Boots met sand. The sand sounded wrong. Too soft. Like stepping into a blanket. The air was cool enough to raise gooseflesh, but not cool enough to be comfortable. My flashlight beam cut across the ground in a narrow cone. Everything looked normal in that first sweep. Then my partner lifted his light and stopped. In the wash there was a camp. Not unusual. A ring of stones where someone tried to make a fire. A torn piece of tarp. A crushed can. A single shoe lying on its side, half buried, like someone fell out of it. What was unusual was the sign around it. Footprints came in, lots of them. Different sizes. Different tread patterns. Some deep, some light. A group had stopped there. But none of the prints left. At first I thought I was reading it wrong. The wash was smooth in places, rippled in others. Wind can erase sign. Sure. But wind doesn't erase only the leaving sign and keep the arriving sign neat as handwriting. I knelt down, ran my gloved hand over the sand. The sand was cool. Dry. Nothing packed down beyond the obvious prints. I looked around, sweeping my light wider, searching for where the trail continued. There was nothing. Just clean sand. My partner said, low, almost irritated. Saying it louder might make it true. He said it had to be wind. Had to be. I agreed. Because the alternative was stupid. The alternative was impossible. The alternative was a camp that swallowed people and then smoothed itself over. We called it in anyway, because that's what you do. You report camps. You log them. You take pictures. You make notes. You pretend that putting things in writing means you own them. I keyed my mic. Dispatch. Unit R. We've got an abandoned camp at marker point. Possible foot sign multiple. No clear exit trail. Static. Then dispatch answered. Routine. Calm. Copy. Unit R. Advise if you locate further sign. And that should have been it. But as I released the mic, the radio crackled again. Not dispatch. A voice came through, clipped and close, like it was in the cab with us. Unit R. Same cadence as my call sign. Same tone my own voice has when I'm keeping it professional. Only I wasn't transmitting. My partner stared at me. I stared at him. Nobody moved for a second. The desert held its breath with us. Then the radio clicked, and the channel went quiet again, as if embarrassed. My partner tried to laugh. It came out thin. He said, maybe someone was stepping on the frequency. Maybe another unit. Maybe an old repeater glitch. We said words like because, maybe is a shield. Maybe keeps you from having to say what you're thinking, because what I was thinking was that something heard me say my name, and it repeated it to see how it felt. Not real. Real. Not real. We continued the sweep. Wider now. Flashlights tracing the wash edge. My heartbeat sounded too loud inside my ears. I remember the smell again. Faint but sharp. Like metal warmed by sun even though the sun had been gone for hours. And then I saw the movement. It wasn't in my beam at first. It was at the edge of vision, the way you see a lizard dart away, the way you catch dust drifting across a track. Only this wasn't a dart. It was a slide. The sand near the far bank shifted, and something moved along it like the ground itself was changing its mind about being flat. I raised my light. Nothing. I lowered it slightly. Swept again. Nothing. But the feeling didn't leave. That pressure, like a tension. Like being watched by something that doesn't have eyes but doesn't need them. I looked down at the wash and noticed a mark I hadn't seen a moment earlier. A long, shallow line pressed into the sand, like something had been dragged. It ran parallel to the bank for a few yards, then vanished into a patch of brush. I followed it with the light, and the brush moved, not from wind, not from an animal pushing through, but as if something passed under it without disturbing it, like a shadow slipping beneath a door. My partner whispered my name, the real one, not my call sign. He didn't mean to. It just came out. I stepped closer, slow, because if it was a person, you don't rush. If it was an animal, you don't rush. If it was nothing, you don't rush. The brush shifted again, and for the briefest second, my flashlight beam caught a dimness in the sand, a place where the light didn't land right, like it was being absorbed. Then it was gone. The desert went still again, perfectly still. Not a cricket, not a wing, not a breath besides ours. We stood there, lights trained on the spot, waiting for something to prove us wrong, waiting for the normal world to return. It didn't. And behind me, in the radio, the static returned, soft as breathing, and under it I heard the faintest imitation of my own voice, saying calm words that I hadn't said yet. We didn't stay at that wash as long as the report would make it sound like we did. The official version, the one that ends up in a log, reads like a clean sequence of actions. Unit observed camp. Unit noted unusual sign. Unit conducted sweep. Unit departed. No further incident. But the desert doesn't run on clean sequences. It runs on hesitation, on what you don't say into a microphone, on what you decide not to write down, because you can already hear how it will sound when someone reads it back with a smirk. We backed away from the brush line without admitting we were backing away. Lights steady, steps controlled. We did that thing agents do when they're trying to be brave for each other. We kept our shoulders square. Posture could keep something from following. My partner kept glancing down at the sand, as if he expected it to ripple again. I kept my eyes up, scanning the edges of the wash, the mesquite shadows, the tall arms of organ pipe cactus that looked, in that moment, less like plants, and more like people caught in mid-gesture. The radio stayed quiet for several minutes. That should have helped. It didn't. Silence out there isn't comfort. Silence is a pause between sentences. We got back into the truck and shut the doors. The interior smelled like old fabric and dust, and the faint chemical sting of the hand sanitizer we used too often. My partner started the engine but didn't pull out right away. He sat there with both hands on the wheel, watching the wash through the windshield as if he expected it to blink. I keyed the mic again to check in. Just routine. Just to plant our voices back into the normal system. Dispatch. Unit R. We're clearing the area. No contact. Static. Then, dispatch came back. Copy. Unit R. Proceed as assigned. Then, a click. A half second of dead air. Then my voice again, low and close in the speaker. Proceed as assigned. My partner's head snapped toward the radio. Mine did too. The hair on my arms lifted as if the air had turned electric. I didn't transmit that. I hadn't even touched the mic. I hadn't even moved. My partner swallowed hard. He tried to make it into a joke. He said maybe the mic stuck. Maybe it played back. Maybe it echoed. But his hands tightened on the wheel until the knuckles went pale. Not real. We drove out slow with headlights off until we hit the main track. When we did turn them on, the beam washed over the desert like a spotlight, revealing nothing. Sand. Brush. Cactus. Nothing running. Nothing watching. Nothing moving. And yet, the whole way back, the feeling stayed like a weight between my shoulder blades, like someone reading my thoughts over my shoulder. Back at station, the fluorescent lights made everything look too clean, too white, too human. The air conditioning hummed. Someone was heating something in a microwave that smelled like stale noodles. Normal sounds. Normal light. My partner and I didn't talk much when we walked in. We did the paperwork like we always did. We typed up the camp report. We put in the coordinates. We attached the photos. I left out the part about the radio. I left out the part about the dimness in the sand. I left out the part about the way the brush moved without moving. Because those things don't have neat boxes to be filed into. They just make you look like you're losing it. And out there, losing it is a career killer. I went home in the morning and did what I always did. Showered. Ate something bland. Tried to sleep. But sleep out there isn't like normal sleep, even in your own bed. The desert follows you into the dark. You wake up, thinking you heard footsteps. You wake up with your mouth dry, like you've been chewing dust. I kept seeing that patch where the light didn't land right. It wasn't the shape that bothered me most. It wasn't even the movement. It was the idea behind it. The sense that it wasn't hiding from us. It was practicing. That afternoon I woke up to the sound of my own radio. I keep a handheld at home sometimes. Off duty, yeah, but we do it. Habit, security. In organ pipe, you learn that something can go wrong even when you're not on shift. It was on the kitchen counter, turned off, and yet it crackled once, like a throat clearing. Then quiet again. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening for it to happen again. Nothing. I told myself it was interference. I told myself it was a battery issue. I told myself anything that would let me lie back down. But when I walked into the kitchen, the radio was standing upright. I'm telling you this exactly because I checked myself. I remember leaving it on its side. I remember sliding it away from the edge so it wouldn't fall. I remember the exact angle. Now it was upright like someone had set it there carefully. Not real. That night I went back on shift and acted normal. I laughed at the right moments. I drank bad coffee. I listened to the same training jokes. I did everything the way you do when you want to convince yourself that you're still you. But the desert doesn't care what you pretend. Around midnight, dispatch sent me and another unit to check a sensor hit along a dirt access road that cut between two low ridges. The new partner that night was different, younger. Loud in that way new agents are loud. Their voice can fill the empty space and keep it from creeping into them. He talked while we drove, talked about cases, talked about rumors, talked about how organ pipe had stories, how the old-timers didn't like certain washes, how some trails were called things like Devil's Cut and Ghost Line. He asked if I'd ever heard of the moving shadow. I didn't answer right away. He looked at me and grinned, like he'd caught my attention. He said there was an old story, not official, not in any briefing, something the Tohono O'odham elders warned kids about, something that lives in the low places and follows footsteps because it can't make its own. He said it's not a coyote, not a mountain lion, not a person. He said it learns voices. I told him to stop talking like that on shift. He laughed, hands up, like he'd just been messing around. But his eyes stayed on the windshield, and his grin faded after a few seconds because the road ahead had gone too dark too fast, as if the night had thickened. We pulled up near the sensor location and stepped out, flashlights on, standard. The desert greeted us with that same organized silence. We walked the line slowly, looking for sign. At first it was normal. A few deer prints, some rodent tracks, wind patterns that looked like ripples on water. Then we found it. Not footprints, a drag line. It ran across the road like someone had drawn it with a stick, shallow but fresh, too straight in places, too deliberate. And every few feet, the line broke into a cluster of shallow impressions like fingers pressing down. Except there were too many of them. The younger agent crouched, shining his light closer. His voice dropped without him meaning it to. He said it looked like someone crawling. I didn't say what I was thinking. That it looked like someone trying to remember how crawling works. Not real. Real. Not real. We followed it off the road into the brush. It led toward a wash. We moved slowly, because that's what you do when you might run into people. You call out sometimes. You announce yourself. You give a chance for surrender or for someone to run if they're going to run. I called out once. Border Patrol. If you can hear me, show yourself. My voice sounded thin, like it didn't belong in the air. No answer. We reached the wash and stopped at the edge. The drag line dropped down into it and continued along the bottom, pressed into sand that looked too smooth, too untouched, like the wash had been waiting. The younger agent lifted his flashlight and swept the opposite bank, and then I saw it again, not in the beam, but in the gap between beams, where darkness pooled. Something moved along the far wall of the wash, low and flat, not a shape you could describe cleanly, more like an absence sliding against the earth. The younger agent didn't see it at first. I didn't tell him immediately because I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining it. But then the darkness shifted in a way darkness doesn't. And in that moment, my radio crackled softly at my hip. Not dispatch, not another unit, just static that sounded like breathing. The younger agent finally saw something too. I knew because his flashlight beam jerked, and his breath caught in his throat. He whispered, barely audible, "What is that?" I didn't answer. Because if I put a name to it, it would become real. Not real. Real. Not real. The movement stopped. The wash went silent. Even the static in my radio went dead. We stood there, lights trained, holding our breath, waiting for it to do something else, waiting for the world to explain itself. And then, from somewhere down the wash, we heard a sound that wasn't a growl, wasn't a cry, wasn't a voice. It was the soft scrape of sand, slow, patient, coming closer. The scrape wasn't loud. That was the problem. If it had been loud, we could have told ourselves it was an animal, a coyote digging, a javelina rooting, something living and explainable. But this scrape was careful, measured, like a hand pulling a heavy curtain 1 inch at a time. The younger agent kept his flashlight aimed down the wash, the beam trembling slightly in a way he didn't notice. I noticed because I'd seen that tremor before, in migrants too exhausted to stand, in smugglers caught off guard, in myself after a close call. It's not weakness. It's the body admitting what the brain refuses. I took one slow step forward and listened. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It was keeping time. Not real. Real. Not real. I keyed my mic, not because I expected dispatch to solve it, but because speaking into the radio reminds you that other human beings exist. Dispatch. Unit R. We're out checking sensor hit. Possible movement in the wash. Stand by. Static answered first, soft and full, like a blanket being lifted. Then dispatch. Copy. What kind of movement? I started to answer. And then another voice came in over the channel. Quiet. Familiar. Professional. What kind of movement? It was my own voice. Not distorted. Not warped. Not a prank. Perfect. My mouth went dry so fast my tongue stuck to my teeth. The younger agent turned his head toward me, eyes wide. He'd heard it too. I could see the moment he realized something was wrong, because his face changed from confused to sickened. Dispatch came in again, sharper now. Unit R. Confirm you're transmitting. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The radio clicked again. Confirm you're transmitting. My voice. Calm. Obedient, as if answering a supervisor. The younger agent whispered, "That's you." He needed me to deny it so his mind could climb back into the safe box it came from. I pulled the radio off my belt and stared at it like the device might flinch. Not real. Real. Not real. I didn't answer dispatch. I didn't answer the copy of me. I just turned the volume down slowly until the speaker quieted. The younger agent's flashlight beam swept the wash again. Faster. Searching. That's when the scrape stopped. The absence of it made the air heavier, made the silence rush in like water filling a hole. We stood there a long moment, eyes burning from not blinking, listening for any sound that would prove this was still the normal world. Nothing. Just the faint whisper of wind high above, sliding over rock. The younger agent swallowed, voice shaking now. "We should back out," he said. "We should call for another unit." He wasn't wrong. But I didn't want another unit. I didn't want more people out here. I didn't want to watch someone else hear their own voice on the radio and look at me for answers. I wanted it to be only us, small, contained, something that could be filed away as a weird night. But the desert doesn't stay small once it knows you noticed. I nodded, and we backed away from the wash edge and sink, boots sliding slightly on gravel. The younger agent kept his light trained down the wash, even as he stepped backward, refusing to turn his back on whatever was out there. And then, at the lip of the wash, his flashlight beam caught something on the sand below. Not the moving absence. Not the dark patch. Something else. A shoe. Half buried. Fresh, like it had been set there. The younger agent froze. His breathing went shallow. He stared at it like it was a face. It looked almost identical to the one we'd found at the camp earlier in the week. That's when the thought landed in me so sharply, I almost flinched. It was leaving markers. Like breadcrumbs. Like it wanted us to follow. Not real. Real. Not real. We turned away from the wash and walked back toward the truck faster, no longer pretending we were calm. I kept glancing behind us, expecting the desert to ripple again, expecting to see that flat movement sliding along the wash wall like a shadow that had learned to crawl. but the darkness stayed still. We reached the truck and climbed in. Doors shut. Locks clicked. I started the engine. For a moment, everything felt normal. The dash lights glowed. The radio was quiet. The air conditioner blew stale, cold air. Then the younger agent leaned forward and pointed at the windshield with a trembling finger. "Look," he whispered. At first I didn't see it. Then I did. On the outside of the windshield, low near the passenger side, there was a smear, like someone had pressed a palm into dust. Except it wasn't a palm. It was too long, too flat, and the impressions weren't 5 fingers. They were many shallow lines, overlapping, like something trying to imitate a hand, and failing. The younger agent didn't move, didn't breathe. I reached slowly, wiping the inside of the windshield with my sleeve. The smear was outside. I hadn't noticed it before, which meant it either appeared while we were out in the wash, or it had been there all along and my eyes were ignoring it until now. I started driving. Headlights cut across the desert road. The younger agent kept staring at the smear, like he expected it to slide upward. He didn't speak for several minutes. Neither did I. Not real. Real. Not real. When we got back into range of station signal, dispatch came over. "Unit R, status update." My thumb hovered over the mic. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want my voice going out into the air where something could catch it. But I had to. This job runs on voice. On response. On the idea that what you say is what you are. I keyed it. "Unit R, negative contact. Clearing location. Possible interference on channel." Dispatch. Paused. Copy. Interference acknowledged. Advise if persists. Then the channel clicked again, softly. And my voice whispered, almost too quiet to hear. "Advise if persists." The younger agent heard it too. He turned his face toward me slowly, like he was afraid fast movement might attract attention. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. His body was doing something else. His body was preparing. "Sir," he said, "do you hear that?" I nodded once. He swallowed and looked forward again, jaw working. It's copying you." I didn't answer because the word copying felt too simple. Copying is what machines do. Copying is what paperwork does. Copying is harmless. This felt like something older than that. This felt like a thing that wasn't supposed to have a voice. Borrowing one anyway. Not real. Real. Not real. When shift ended, the younger agent disappeared into the locker room without saying goodbye. I could tell he wanted to pretend the night didn't happen. I could tell he was going to keep it inside until it either faded or tore something loose. I should have done the same. I should have gone home and let time scrape away the memory like wind erasing footprints. Instead, I started asking questions. Not out loud. Not officially. Quietly. The way you do when you know the answers won't be safe. I found a senior agent in the break room. A man who'd been working this sector before I even applied. The kind of guy with sun lines carved into his face and a calmness that looked like resignation. I asked him if he'd ever had radio interference that sounded like a person. He looked at me for a long second, then looked away. "Don't," he said. That was it. One word. I tried again. "Something's out there," I said. "Something that moves low. Something that—" He cut me off, voice still calm. "This place eats attention," he said. "You stare at it, it stares back. You listen too hard. You start hearing things you can't unhear." I felt my throat tighten. "So you've heard it," I said. His jaw worked once. He didn't look at me. He took a sip of coffee and said, very quietly, "We've all heard something." Then he stood up, tossed his cup, and walked away as if leaving the room would keep the words from sticking. I went home that morning with my head buzzing. I tried to sleep. I tried to tell myself it was stress, fatigue, the way the mind fills in blanks when you've been staring into darkness too long. But when I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Scrape, pause, scrape. Not a sound in my room. Not a sound outside. Inside my head. Not real, real, not real. At 3 p.m, I sat up and checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. but my voicemail icon showed one new message. I froze. I didn't remember hearing it ring. I didn't remember any notification. My hand trembled as I pressed play. At first there was only static, faint and low, like wind through brush. Then a click. Then, my own voice. Unit R. Proceed as assigned. I dropped the phone like it burned. It hit the bed and bounced. The voicemail kept playing. My voice again. Calmer, softer, almost comforting. Everything normal. I stared at the phone, heart hammering. The message ended with a long, quiet exhale. Not mine. Something else. I sat there in the afternoon light, sweating, feeling ridiculous and terrified at the same time. Feeling my mind split between knowing this couldn't be real and knowing it was. Not real. Real. Not real. That night I went back out anyway. Because I needed to see it again. I needed to prove it wasn't happening, or prove that it was. I needed to stop being in between. The organ pipe sector doesn't let you stay in between. Dispatch assigned me to a routine patrol route along one of the more isolated access roads, the kind that runs parallel to washes and cuts through open desert with no lights, no structures. Nothing but the line of your headlights and whatever waits outside them. As I drove, the radio stayed quiet. That should have been relief. Instead, it felt like a pause before someone speaks your name. I reached the area near the wash from earlier and slowed the truck. The road was empty. The night was still. And then, just beyond the reach of my headlights, the sand shifted. A low movement, barely visible, slid along the ground like the desert surface had decided to peel itself forward. I held my breath. It moved again, slow, patient, like it wasn't hiding anymore. It knew I would follow. I should have kept driving. That's the simplest version of it. The version I wish I could go back and force onto myself like a different choice. Keep driving. Don't look. Don't slow down. Don't let your curiosity grow teeth. But the organ pipe sector teaches you something early. It teaches you that ignoring a sign doesn't erase it. It just means you walk into it later, with less warning. So I slowed the truck until the tires barely rolled. The headlights washed over the sand in a long pale cone, making every pebble throw a sharp little shadow. The desert looked calm. Still, like it was pretending to be the same place it was yesterday. But the movement was there, low and deliberate. Not running, not hiding, almost as if it knew I'd come back alone. Not real. Not real. My hand drifted to the radio without thinking. I didn't key it. I just touched it. Like a person checking for a pulse. Quiet. I turned the wheel slightly and pulled off the road. The tires crunched on gravel, then softened into sand. When I stopped, the engine ticked in the cooling air. I waited. I don't know what I expected. A figure to stand up. An animal to bolt. A group to scatter. Nothing happened. The movement remained a suggestion at the edge of the light. A faint shift that made the ground look like it was breathing. I told myself it could still be something normal. Heat distortion. A low animal in the brush. Wind hitting sand just right. Except there was no wind. Not even the small wind you always get out there. The desert wasn't moving. Only that thing was. I stepped out of the truck. Boots met sand. The sound was too loud. Every step felt like announcing myself into a cathedral. My flashlight clicked on. I kept the beam narrow, tight, like I was trying not to wake something sleeping. The air smelled like dust and creosote, and that faint metallic edge I couldn't place, like coins warmed in a pocket, like old tools left in sun. I walked forward slowly, toward the point where I'd seen the shift. The ground looked normal under the beam. Dry wash sand, scattered stones, brittle brush. I swept the light side to side, searching for sign. And there it was. A drag line. Fresh enough that the edges hadn't crumbled. It ran from the edge of the road into open desert, straight as a thought you can't stop thinking. I followed it with the beam. The line wasn't deep, but it was consistent, as if something heavy had moved with full body contact against the earth. Every few feet, the line broke into those strange impressions again. Not feet, not hands. Something like hands if hands had too many joints. I felt my throat tighten. Not real. Real. Not real. I glanced back at the truck. The headlights still pointed outward, turning the desert into a bright tunnel behind me. I was a dark silhouette in my own light. Out here, you're never as alone as you feel. There are always eyes somewhere. Human eyes behind brush lines. There are always trails you can't see until you're standing inside them. But this wasn't human. The dragline didn't have the messiness of panic. It had purpose. I kept walking, flashlight trained on the sand. The line led toward a wash I recognized. Same cut in the earth. Same bend where the bank rose higher. The kind of wash that holds sound weird, like a throat. As I got closer, my radio crackled once. Not loud, just a soft pop of static. I stopped walking immediately. The radio stayed quiet. I told myself that was nothing, but my body didn't believe it. My body held still, waiting for the next sound. After a few seconds, I moved again. The dragline dipped down into the wash. I stood at the edge and aimed my flashlight downward. The bottom was smooth and pale, almost too smooth, like the wind had been grooming it. Then my beam caught something on the far side. A set of footprints, human. One set, clear enough to count the tread pattern. A boot, not a sneaker. An agent's boot. I stared at them. The prints went down the bank, crossed the bottom, and climbed up the far side. Then they just stopped. The last print was sharp and deep, like the person paused there, weight shifting, deciding where to go next. But beyond it, there was nothing. No continuation. No scuff marks. No faint edge. Nothing. As if the person lifted straight into the air. Or sank. Not real. My first instinct was to key the radio and report it. Possible lost agent. Possible disorientation. Possible injury. But my thumb hovered, and something inside me warned me not to speak. Because if I spoke, I would be giving it more. More of my voice. More of my patterns. More of the thing it had already started taking. Instead, I crouched and ran my gloved hand over the last footprint. The sand was cool, dry. It didn't collapse. It held its shape perfectly. Too perfectly. That's when I noticed the dragline intersecting with the footprints. It didn't cross them like something passing later. It blended into them, as if the dragline had been there first, and then the footprints had been placed on top afterward, like a demonstration, like something making a copy. I stood up so fast my knees cracked. I turned my flashlight beam wider across the wash. Nothing moved. No figure. No animal. No shadow. Just desert. But the silence pressed in harder now. The air felt dense, like breathing through cloth. I took a step back from the edge. And then the radio whispered. Unit R. I froze. My voice. Low, close. Not coming from dispatch. Not coming from another unit. Unit R, proceed as assigned. I didn't touch the mic. I didn't touch anything. Not real. I yanked the radio off my belt and stared at it. The speaker was dark. The display blank. And yet my own voice continued. Faint under static, like someone speaking from behind a wall. Proceed as assigned. The words hit me with a strange kind of anger, like the desert was giving me a command in my own tone. I did what I'd been trained to do when things stopped making sense. I forced myself into procedure. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. I typed the coordinates with shaking fingers. I took pictures of the footprint line. I took pictures of the drag mark. Proof. Evidence. Something solid. Except when I looked at the photos, the wash didn't look right. The sand looked blurred. The drag line looked like a shadow, faint and stretched. The footprints looked shallow, almost erased, like the camera refused to see it properly. I took another picture. Same thing. I aimed my flashlight directly into the wash and filmed video. The screen showed only pale sand and brush. No drag mark, no footprints, nothing. I lowered the phone slowly, pulse racing. The proof wasn't coming with me. The proof was staying out here. Not real. Real. Not real. I backed away from the wash, eyes darting to every dark patch. I kept my flashlight beam moving, never letting it rest too long on one spot. I didn't want to give the night time to form itself again. I reached the road and exhaled like I'd been holding breath for minutes. The truck waited where I left it. Quiet. Normal. I climbed in, shut the door, locked it. For a moment I just sat there in the driver's seat, listening to my own breathing. My hands were sweating against the wheel. I started the engine. The radio burst with static loud enough to make me flinch. Dispatch, Unit R, status. I stared at the radio. Then dispatch repeated, sharper. Unit R, status. I keyed the mic with a shaky thumb. Unit R, all clear. No contact. Dispatch paused. Copy. Then the radio clicked again. And my voice came through before dispatch could say anything else. All clear. No contact. The same words I'd just spoken. A perfect echo. Except I hadn't transmitted that second time. My stomach turned. Not real. Real. Not real. I turned the radio volume down and drove back toward station, headlights carving through blackness. The road felt longer than it ever had. The brush looked too close. The cactus arms looked like they were leaning in. Every now and then, I'd see movement at the edge of the beam. Not a figure. Just the ground shifting. Low and smooth, matching my speed, like it was pacing me. I drove faster. The movement stayed even. I slowed at a curve. It slowed too. It wasn't chasing. It was practicing. I was no longer the hunter. I was the reference. Not real. Real. Not real. When I finally reached station lights, relief hit hard enough to make my eyes sting. I pulled into the lot and parked. The engine ticked as it cooled. I sat there for a long time before getting out. Because stepping out meant returning to people. Returning to questions. Returning to a normal world where I'd have to pretend I hadn't just been followed by something that could mimic my voice. I forced myself inside. The station looked the same. Fluorescent glare. Coffee smell. Paperwork. But the moment I walked in, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. A supervisor was standing at the counter, listening to a radio transmission, nodding. He looked up and said, "Casual as anything. Good work out there tonight, R." I blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked. He frowned slightly, like I was being strange. "You checked in 10 minutes ago. Said you were all clear and returning." I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't checked in 10 minutes ago. I had just pulled into the lot. Not real. I didn't correct him. I couldn't. I just nodded, forced a weak half smile, and walked past him toward the locker room. My boots felt too heavy. My body felt wrong. It wasn't synced properly to my movements. Inside the locker room, I sat on the bench and stared at my hands. I flexed my fingers slowly, watching them move like I wasn't sure they belonged to me. My radio, clipped to my belt, crackled once, soft, almost affectionate. Then my voice whispered, so quiet I could barely hear it. "Everything normal. Everything normal." That phrase stayed with me all day like grit under an eyelid. You can blink all you want, but it doesn't leave. It just scratches every time you try to look at anything else. I tried to sleep after shift, but my apartment felt wrong. The silence inside wasn't the soft kind you get when the act kicks off and the world settles. It was the same organized silence from the desert, like the air was waiting for someone to speak first. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing. And then, in the pause between breaths, I heard it. A second breath. Not loud, not close, just present, like a faint echo delayed by a heartbeat. Not real. I sat up fast, scanning the room. Nothing. No movement. No shadow sliding beneath the door. Just furniture and darkness, and the dim rectangle of window light. I told myself I was exhausted. I told myself the mind likes patterns. I told myself fear makes copies of itself. But when I got up and walked into the kitchen, I saw the radio on the counter again. Still turned off. Still standing upright. And beside it, on the dusty surface, there was a line. A shallow line pressed into the dust like someone dragged the edge of their hand across it. Except it wasn't the edge of a hand. It was too wide, too smooth, too deliberate. I stared at that line until my eyes burned. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from voicemail. Another new message. My stomach tightened like a fist. I didn't want to play it. I already knew what it would sound like. But leaving it unheard felt worse, like leaving a door half open in a house you're afraid to sleep in. I pressed play. Static. A long, quiet exhale. Then my own voice, calm and precise, like I was giving a routine report. Unit R, status normal. A pause. Then, even calmer. Everything normal. I threw the phone onto the couch like it was a bug and backed away from it. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The message ended with a soft click, like someone gently hanging up. Not real. I spent the rest of that day trying to act normal. I went through the motions. Ate. Showered. Checked my gear. Drank water even though I wasn't thirsty. But every time I passed a mirror I stopped. Not because I looked different. Because I was waiting to see if my reflection was a half second behind. That night I went back to work and didn't mention the voicemails. I didn't mention the line on the counter. I didn't mention any of it. Because if I said it out loud, I'd be making it real in a way the desert would hear. Organ pipe has its own rules. You learn them without anyone explaining them. Things you don't say. Washes you don't linger in. Shadows you don't follow. I was breaking every rule. My assignment that night was routine patrol again. But dispatch had us focus on the same general area where the sensor hits had been happening. Same ridges. Same wash lines. Same open stretch of desert where the horizon looks close enough to touch but never is. The sky was clear, stars sharp as nails. The moon was thin, barely there. The kind of night where your headlights feel like the only light that ever existed. I drove slow, scanning for sign. Then I saw it. Not in the road, not in the brush. Along the side of the track, where the sand meets the harder ground. A long shallow mark, fresh. The drag line. I stopped the truck. For a full minute, I didn't move. I just stared at it through the windshield, feeling something in me settle into a cold certainty. It wanted me here. Not real. Real. Not real. I stepped out and aimed my flashlight down at the line. It ran forward into darkness. Straight as a road. There were those strange impressions beside it again. Like fingers. Like joints. Something practicing the idea of hands. I followed it a few steps. Then stopped. Because the air changed. The wind died so suddenly it felt like someone shut a door. The desert went silent in that heavy way again, like the world was holding its breath to listen. Then my radio crackled. Dispatch. Faint and distant. Unit R. Report location. I didn't answer right away. My thumb hovered above the mic. I listened instead, because under dispatch's voice, beneath the static, there was another sound. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Coming from somewhere ahead of me. Low. Patient. Slow enough to feel inevitable. My flashlight beam swept the brush line. Nothing. Swept again. Nothing. Then the ground just beyond the beam shifted like a wrinkle smoothing out. A shape moved there. Flat and long and wrong. Sliding along the sand without lifting. And for the first time, it didn't stop. When I looked at it, it kept moving. As if it had learned I couldn't stop it just by noticing. The radio clicked again. My own voice whispered, calm and certain, like it was standing right behind my ear. Proceed as assigned. I didn't move. I couldn't, because the dragline at my feet began to deepen. Not from pressure, not from weight, but as if the sand itself was being pulled gently forward. As if something beneath the surface had taken hold of the earth and was drawing itself closer. Not real. Real. Not real. The shape ahead slid closer by inches, still low, still quiet. And then, just before my flashlight beam reached it fully, the light dimmed. Not the battery, not the beam. The air itself, as if the night had thickened in front of the lens. And in that dimness, I heard it again. My own voice. Not from the radio this time. From the desert. Unit R. Unit R. And it was coming from everywhere. Unit R. Unit R. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout. It was almost gentle, like someone calling you from another room in a house you forgot was occupied. But it came from everywhere at once. From the wash, from the brush, from behind the cactus arms that stood like raised hands in the dark. My flashlight beam stayed fixed on the dim patch ahead, the place where light didn't land correctly. The air there looked thicker, like heat shimmer but cold, like the night had decided to fold itself. I tried to step back, my boots slid in the sand. The dragline at my feet deepened again, the edge of it crumbling as if something underneath tugged forward. Not fast, not violent, patient, like a hand pulling a sheet. Not real. Dispatch crackled again, voice sharper now. Unit R. Confirm location. You're not tracking on the map. I swallowed, forcing my thumb down on the mic. Unit R. Near marker point. I'm checking sign. Static filled the channel for a heartbeat. Then dispatch answered. Copy. Then a click. Then my own voice came through, steady and calm. Unit R. Near marker point. I'm checking sign. The exact words I just said, repeated like the world was rehearsing me. I released the mic and stared at the radio like it might turn its face away. My beam wavered. I steadied it again, forcing my hands to stop shaking. The shape ahead moved closer by inches. Still low, still flat, still wrong. It slid along the sand like it didn't have legs. It didn't need them. It belonged to the ground. For one awful moment, I thought I saw texture at its edge. Not fur, not skin, something like layered shadow, rippling. And within that ripple, something that resembled a bend. The suggestion of a joint trying to form, as if it was learning how to stand. I took another step back. The sand shifted again under my boot. But this time it felt like stepping onto something softer than sand, like stepping on cloth. My stomach tightened. I glanced down. The ground beneath my foot looked normal, but it felt wrong. I lifted my boots slowly. The sand under it was smooth, too smooth, like the print I should have left was being erased the moment my weight left it. Not real. A sound drifted across the desert then, barely audible. Scrape, pause, scrape closer now. Not from ahead, from the side. I turned my flashlight sharply toward the brush line. Nothing. I swept left and right, beam cutting over mesquite and brittle stems. Nothing. Then I saw it. Not in the beam. In the space between beam and darkness. A low movement along the base of the wash, sliding parallel to me. Keeping pace. I spun fully, trying to catch it directly, but the moment the center of my light touched it, the shape flattened even more, pressing into the ground until it seemed to become the ground. A dimness. A missing piece of night. The radio on my belt crackled on its own. A soft whisper came through. Not dispatch. Not another unit. My own voice again. But this time it sounded closer. Like it was coming from inside my chest. Everything normal. I didn't want to run. Running in the desert is stupid. Running wastes water. Running makes noise. Running gets you disoriented. But every part of me wanted distance. Space. Anything that wasn't this. I forced myself to walk backward toward the truck. Flashlight beam locked on the dim patch as if keeping it lit could keep it contained. The truck headlights glowed behind me, distant but steady. They felt like the only anchor to the real world I had left. Not real. Real. Not real. I reached the road edge. The dim patch slid forward again. And then the thing did something that made my skin go ice cold. It stopped moving. The desert went perfectly still. Then, slowly, the dimness lifted. Not high. Only inches. But enough. The outline rose like a sheet being peeled off the sand. And beneath it, for the first time, I saw something that looked almost like a shape, trying to become three-dimensional. Not a face. Not eyes. Just the suggestion of depth. A fold in darkness, as if the shadow itself was trying to turn toward me. My throat made a small involuntary sound. Not a word. Just a broken breath. The thing held still. And then the radio clicked again. But this time, the sound didn't come from my belt. It came from the desert. A familiar chirp. The exact tone of a handheld radio keying up. Then my own voice, clearer than ever, spoke from the darkness ahead. Unit R. Stand by. I froze so hard my joints hurt. Because I hadn't said that. I hadn't even thought to say that. But it had. It was using phrases I used. Commands I'd given, routine language that lived in my mouth like muscle memory. Stand by. I stared into the dimness as if I could force my eyes to see what was speaking. Then I heard a second sound, faint and distant. A human voice. Not the radio. A real voice, carried thinly by the open desert. Help. It was so quiet I wasn't sure it was real. Help. It came again, slightly closer, from somewhere down the wash. My chest tightened. Lost hiker. Migrant separated from group. Someone injured. The kind of thing you don't ignore. The kind of thing your training drills into you until it becomes instinct. But the timing was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Not real. The voice called again. Help me. And it sounded like someone trying not to cry. My hand drifted toward the radio mic. Dispatch, I might have a lost person out here. Before I could transmit, my radio crackled on its own. My voice spilling out without permission. Negative. All clear. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed the radio and stared at it, thumb hovering uselessly, like I could stop it by gripping harder. The voice down the wash came again. Help. This time I recognized something that made my stomach twist. The cadence, a slight hesitation between syllables. It sounded like my younger partner from earlier in the week. The one who'd whispered, "What is that?" The one who'd disappeared into the locker room and never looked me in the eye again. Help. I took one step forward without meaning to. The dimness ahead slid backward, retreating just enough to keep distance, like it wanted me to follow, like it was leading. My breathing turned shallow. Not real. I forced myself to stop, forced my boots to stay planted. Then my flashlight beam caught something on the sand near the wash edge. A boot print. Fresh. Agent tread, and beside it another. A trail leading down. My mouth went dry. My mind tried to form logic. Maybe he came back. Maybe he was out here. Maybe he needed help. But another thought slid in. Colder. Maybe it just learned his voice too. The desert doesn't need a mouth to speak. Sometimes it borrows yours. The radio clicked again, and my own voice whispered, almost kindly, "Proceed as assigned." The voice down the wash said one last time, softer now, like it was running out of breath. "Help me." I stood there shaking, caught between training and terror, staring at the footprints that ended exactly where the dimness began. I don't know how long I stood there. Out there, time isn't a straight line. It stretches. It folds. A minute can feel like an hour if you're listening hard enough. An hour can vanish if you blink at the wrong moment. I stared at those boot prints until they stopped looking like prints and started looking like a warning. They led down into the wash. They crossed the pale sand at the bottom. And they ended at the edge of that dimness, like someone had walked into a shadow and been swallowed clean. Not real. Real. Not real. The voice down the wash didn't call again. It left silence behind. The same heavy silence that made my thoughts feel too loud. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to get back into the truck, drive straight to station, pretend this never happened. But my body wouldn't move, because there was something else in the sand. Not just the dragline, not just the footprints. Marks, shallow, repeated marks pressed into the wash bed. Almost like scratches, a pattern that didn't belong to wind or animal. I aimed my flashlight down and stepped closer to the edge, careful not to slide. The marks were clustered in groups, like someone practicing the same motion again and again. Lines that curved, stopped, started again. Shapes that resembled hands but didn't match any hand I'd ever seen. Too many impressions, too many angles. Practice. That word landed in my mind and wouldn't leave. Like handwriting drills, something teaching itself how to move like us, how to touch like us, how to leave the right sign behind. My stomach turned. Not real. Real. Not real. I forced myself to key the mic because I needed someone human to answer. I needed dispatch to be real. Dispatch, Unit R. I'm at wash line near marker point. Possible lost individual. Requesting another unit for search. Static. Then, dispatch. Clear. Copy. Unit R. Stand by. We're patching in support. Relief hit me so hard I almost sagged. Human response. Procedure. Real. Then the radio clicked again. so softly it could have been imagined. And my own voice slid into the channel. "Copy, Unit R. Stand by. We're patching in support." Dispatch went silent. Just for a beat. Even dispatch heard it and didn't know what to do with it. Then dispatch spoke again, tighter now. "Unit R. Confirm you are alone." I swallowed. "Affirmative, dispatch. Alone." Click. And my voice repeated it. "Affirmative. Alone." The words hung there like a stain. Not real. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned the radio off completely and shoved it into my pocket like hiding it would help. The desert didn't care. From down in the wash, the scrape returned. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. But this time it wasn't coming closer in a straight line. It was moving around. Circling. A slow, patient orbit. I swept my flashlight beam across the wash bottom. Nothing. The sand was pale. The bank walls were still. The brush didn't move. But I could hear it. The sound of something pressing itself against the earth and dragging forward a few inches at a time. Like it was moving just out of sight, always behind the edge of the beam. Like it understood light now. Like it understood where not to be. Not real. My throat tightened. I forced my feet to step backward toward the truck again. One step. Then another. The scrape paused, then resumed, perfectly matching my pace. The scrape stopped. I breathed, shallow and fast. Then a new sound came, faint at first. A radio chirp. Not from my pocket, not from my belt, from somewhere behind me, out in the open desert. I turned sharply, and my flashlight beam landed on something that made my heart drop. A second handheld radio, lying in the sand a few yards away, half buried like it had been dropped. The antenna bent, the casing scuffed. It looked exactly like ours, like Border Patrol issue. I stared at it, mind racing. No one else was assigned this stretch tonight. No call about a missing unit. No report. And yet there it was, like the desert had placed it there for me to find. Not real. I took one cautious step toward it. The air changed again. That pressure returned, thick and close, like standing too near a big animal you can't see. The radio in the sand crackled. Then my own voice came from its speaker, clear and calm. "Unit R. Walk forward." My stomach turned cold. I didn't move. The voice repeated, softer this time. "Walk forward." I backed away instead, slow, keeping my flashlight beam on the radio like it might move. The scrape returned. Closer now. Not from the wash, from behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Because every instinct screamed that if I turned I would see something too close. Something I wouldn't be able to unsee. The scrape paused. Then the air behind me seemed to shift, like something large had settled into place. The temperature dropped slightly. Not like weather. Like shade. My breath caught. Not real. Real. Not real. And then, right beside my ear, I heard it. Not through a radio. Not through static. A voice in the open air speaking sign in my own tone. "Unit R." I stood frozen, flashlight beam shaking in front of me, heart hammering so hard it made my vision pulse. The voice behind me spoke again, slow and patient. Everything normal. I couldn't stop myself. I whispered back, barely audible, "Who are you?" Silence. Then the scrape resumed, slow and satisfied. Like the question had been the only thing it wanted. I ran. I broke every rule. I ran across sand and gravel, boots slipping, lungs burning. I didn't care about noise. I didn't care about sign. I didn't care about anything except distance. The truck headlights were a white tunnel. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, locked it, started the engine with shaking hands. For a second the world narrowed to the dashboard glow and my own breathing. Then the radio, still off, crackled once. My voice whispered from somewhere inside the cab, calm as a lullaby. "Proceed as assigned." I hit the gas and tore down the road, headlights bouncing, the desert flashing past like a film strip. In the rearview mirror, for the briefest moment, I saw the sand behind me ripple. A long, low movement sliding after the truck. Not chasing fast, just following. Patient, certain. Not real. Real. Not real. I didn't stop driving until the station lights were behind me. That's the part people won't understand if they've never worked organ pipe. They'll ask why I didn't turn back to the station, why I didn't go straight to supervision, why I didn't park under the cameras and let the fluorescent glare burn the night off me. But you don't always trust lights after something learns how to hide inside them. I drove past the turnoff like I didn't see it. Tires humming, hands locked on the wheel, breath coming in shallow pulls. The road unspooled ahead of me in a pale strip, and the desert stayed on both sides, flat and endless, watching without movement. Not real. Real. Not real. I told myself I was going to clear my head, that I'd loop back after 10 minutes, that I'd find some open stretch and sit with the engine off and listen for any sound that proved the world had snapped back into place. But I didn't, because the entire time I drove, the rearview mirror felt wrong, not because I saw something in it, because I didn't. The headlights behind me didn't show dust, no bouncing reflection off brush, no distant animal eyes, just a clean, empty slice of road, as if the night refused to reflect anything back. Like something had learned where mirrors look. I drove another mile, then another. Then I finally eased off the gas and let the truck roll to a stop on the shoulder where the desert opened wide and flat. I shut the engine off. The silence rushed in so hard it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I sat there, hands still on the wheel, listening. No wind, no insects, no distant highway. The world felt paused, like a video held on a single frame. Not real. My radio was still in my pocket, turned off, battery pulled. I'd done everything that should have made it dead, but I could feel it against my thigh like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to give it the courtesy of attention, because attention is what it eats. That's what the senior agent said. This place eats attention. I stared out through the windshield. The desert was a black sheet with stars stitched into it. The shapes of organ pipe cactus stood in the distance like silhouettes of people waiting for a bus that would never come. I waited for my breathing to slow. It didn't. Every inhale sounded too loud. Every exhale sounded like something else was exhaling with me. Just a fraction delayed, like a copy learning rhythm. Not real. I whispered to myself without meaning to. I'm here. The words fell into the cab and vanished. No echo, no comfort. I tried again, quieter. I'm here. For a moment, nothing answered. Then, from outside the truck, from somewhere close to the passenger door, a voice repeated it. I'm here. My voice, same pitch, same tiredness, same slow way I speak when I'm trying to sound calm. My skin went cold, every muscle locked. I didn't turn my head. I didn't move my eyes. I stared straight ahead. Looking away would invite it closer. My mouth moved anyway, barely. No. A pause. Then outside the truck, my voice again. No. Not real. The passenger side window fogged slightly at the bottom, just a faint haze as if something warm had come close. But the night outside was cold enough that fog didn't make sense. Unless something was breathing there. Unless something was leaning in. The fog drew upward slowly in a long smooth streak, like a palm sliding against glass. Too wide, too flat, too deliberate. My throat closed. I forced air in through my nose, shallow, careful. I told myself not to look. I told myself if I looked, I'd give it a shape, and shape is what it wants. But my eyes betrayed me. I flicked them sideways for half a second. The window was dark. The streak of fog was there, and behind it, the faintest dimness pressed against the glass. Like a shadow pushing forward without a source. Not real. Real. Not real. My radio in my pocket crackled. A soft click. Then static, low and even, like breathing through cloth. Then my own voice came through, calm as dispatch. Unit R, stand by. My hands tightened on the wheel so hard my wrists hurt. I didn't key the mic. I didn't answer. The radio clicked again. Unit R, proceed as assigned. I squeezed my eyes shut for 1 second. 1 second. When I opened them, the fog streak on the passenger window was gone. But something else had appeared. A line on the glass, as if traced by a fingertip through dust, 4 inches long. Then another line beside it, then a third, slow strokes, neat and measured. Like writing practice. Like a hand learning what a window is. Not real. I started the engine. The cab filled with the low rumble of the truck, and for a moment it felt like reality returned through vibration, like sound could hold the world together. I slammed the truck into gear and pulled back onto the road. Headlights cut forward. The desert remained motionless. I drove with my eyes locked ahead, refusing mirrors, refusing side glances, refusing anything that might turn the dark into a doorway. After a few minutes, my breathing eased. The pressure lifted slightly. My thoughts started to reconnect, like nerves waking up after being numb. I told myself it was over. That I'd imagined it. That exhaustion and fear had taken something normal and twisted it. Not real. Real. Not real. Then dispatch came through, clear as day. Unit R. Report status. I froze. Because my radio was still off. Battery pulled. Dead. And yet dispatch was coming through the cab speakers as if the system was still listening. I swallowed and forced my thumb to the mic out of reflex. The mic wasn't there, because the radio wasn't on my belt. It was in my pocket. Dead. Dispatch repeated. Unit R. Report status. I didn't answer. The channel clicked once, and another voice filled the cab. My voice. All clear. Everything normal. I felt something crawl up the back of my neck. Not a bug. Not a touch. Just the sensation of attention turning fully toward me. Dispatch replied. Satisfied. Copy that. Unit R. Then silence. Not real. Real. Not real. I drove the rest of the way home without remembering the turns, without remembering the lights. I only remember arriving because I found myself sitting in the parking lot of my apartment complex with the engine off, and my hands still locked on the wheel. My phone was on the seat beside me. The screen lit up once without me touching it. A voicemail notification. One new message. I didn't open it. I didn't want to hear myself again. I walked inside instead, locking the door behind me even though locks don't mean much when something knows the sound of your breathing. Inside, my apartment was dark and quiet. Familiar shapes, familiar air. I stood in the living room and listened. Nothing. For a moment, nothing. I went to the bathroom and turned on the light. My face looked pale. My eyes looked too wide. I leaned closer to the mirror and stared, waiting for the reflection to lag. It didn't. It matched me perfectly. Almost perfectly. Not real. Real. Not real. I shut the light off and went to bed. I lay there in the dark with my phone face down on the nightstand and my dead radio on the floor like a discarded tool. I tried to slow my breathing, tried to make my thoughts ordinary, tried to think about grocery lists, traffic, paperwork, anything besides sand and silence and voices that weren't mine. Then I heard it. A soft scrape. Pause. A soft scrape. Not outside, not in the walls, along the floor, from the hallway, coming toward the bedroom. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared into the dark until my eyes watered. The scrape stopped at my door. A long stillness. Then a whisper. So close it might have been inside my skull. Unit R. I couldn't help it. My lips parted. My throat worked. I whispered back without thinking. The silence that followed felt satisfied. Then, very softly, my own voice answered from somewhere in the dark. Everything normal, and then my phone buzzed once. One new voicemail. Two new voicemails. Three. Over and over, stacking, piling up like footsteps that never show themselves. I reached toward the phone to shut it off. My hand stopped halfway. Because my hand didn't feel like my hand. It hesitated like it was waiting for permission. Not real. The scrape started again, slow and careful, and I realized it wasn't moving away. It was moving under the door. My breath hitched. I tried to sit up. I couldn't. My body felt held down by something that wasn't weight, wasn't pressure, just certainty. Like the desert had finally found the part of me that responds to commands. The phone vibrated again. A voicemail began playing on its own. Static. A long, quiet exhale. Then my voice. Steady as dispatch. Unit R. Proceed as assigned. I tried to speak, to say no, to say stop, to say anything. But my mouth only formed one sound, small and automatic, like a trained response. Copy. And then the recording cut off mid-breath, as if someone set it down and walked.